the whispered origins. In the dense misty forests of Antithera, legend spoke of a language forged in gold, a tongue so ancient and powerful that it transcended the barriers of speech. It could translate anything. Ancient runes, forgotten scriptures, even the wordless gestures of the dead. But the gift carried a cost. The very act of uttering words in the golden language invited death, swift and enigmatic. None who spoke it survived long enough to tell the tale of how it worked. Though it was dismissed as a myth by most, stories persisted. Some said it was the language of gods, stolen by humans and cursed. Others claimed it was an invention of a mad king who sought to understand all things but paid the price for his hubris. But for a select few, it wasn't a myth. It was a riddle to be solved. In the quiet village of Elomir, nestled at the edge of the forest, young Arlen grew up hearing these tales. His grandmother, an eccentric scholar who claimed to have once glimpsed the language etched in stone, would tell him stories by the fire. "They say the words shine," she murmured, her eyes glassy with age. "Every letter like molten gold. Beautiful, perfect. But they also say the letters burn. Not the skin, no. They burn the soul. Once spoken, the words never leave you. They take something you can't ever get back." As a boy, Arlen was enchanted by her tales. But as he grew older, he dismissed them as fanciful stories from a lonely old woman. He turned his attention to more practical pursuits, learning to hunt, fish, and barter in the nearby towns. Still, deep in the back of his mind, the stories lingered like a faint whisper. Everything changed the night his grandmother died. It was a stormy evening, the kind where the wind seemed to howl secrets into the cracks of the wooden house. Arlen had returned late from the forest, his boots caked in mud, his catch slung over his shoulder. When he pushed open the door, the fire had burned low, and the house was unusually quiet. "Gran?" he called out. No response. He found her in her study, slumped over the desk. Her thin frame seemed almost weightless, her gray hair spilling over the old, cracked wood. In her hand, she clutched something, a golden shard no larger than a finger. It gleamed unnaturally, even in the dim light of the storm. Arlen felt his breath hitch. Beside her, there was a book, its pages covered in strange, shimmering symbols. He recognized them instantly. They were the letters she had spoken of, the letters of the golden language. Fear gripped him, but curiosity was stronger. Carefully, he reached for the shard, prying it from her cold, lifeless hand. A faint warmth spread through his palm as he touched it, and a strange hum filled his ears. It wasn't a sound. It was more like a vibration inside his skull, a sense of being on the verge of understanding something profound. The book was open to a single page. The symbols, though incomprehensible, seemed to shimmer and shift as he stared at them. His grandmother's quill rested beside the book, the ink still wet. She had written something, but not in the language of their village. No, these were the golden letters, letters she had no way of knowing. His eyes traced the shimmering script, and though he couldn't read it, he felt an overwhelming urge to speak it aloud. The words seemed to call to him, begging to be freed from the page. "No," he muttered, shaking his head and stepping back. The hum in his skull grew louder, more insistent. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he saw something move in the shadows of the room. The storm outside howled louder. The windows rattled, and then he heard it, a voice, not his own, whispering in the dark. "Say it." Over the next few days, Arlen became obsessed with the book. He buried his grandmother in the village cemetery, but even as he laid her to rest, his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about the shimmering letters, the golden shard, and the voice he'd heard that night. He tried to push it aside, tried to focus on his chores and daily life. But the pull of the book was too strong. Every night, he found himself drawn to the study, staring at the strange symbols until his eyes ached. One night, unable to resist any longer, he decided to seek help. He packed the book and the shard into a satchel and set off for the town of Durwin, where a renowned scholar named Maelys was said to reside. If anyone could make sense of the golden language, it was her. The journey to Durwin was long and treacherous. The forest seemed darker than usual, the trees casting long, skeletal shadows across the path. Arlen couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Once, he thought he heard footsteps behind him, but when he turned, there was nothing there. By the time he reached Durwin, he was exhausted. The town was bustling with activity, its cobblestone streets filled with merchants, travelers, and scholars. He asked around and eventually found Maelys in a cluttered workshop at the edge of town. She was a tall, sharp-eyed woman with streaks of gray in her black hair. Her workshop was filled with ancient artifacts, maps, and scrolls. When Arlen showed her the book and the shard, her expression shifted from curiosity to alarm. "Where did you get this?" she demanded, her voice low and urgent. "It belonged to my grandmother," Arlen said. She died holding it." Maelys's eyes narrowed. "Do you have any idea what this is?" Arlen hesitated. "I've heard stories about a language that can translate anything. But," he swallowed hard, "but it kills the people who speak it." Maelys nodded grimly. "The golden language. It's no myth, boy. It's real. And it's dangerous beyond your understanding." She reached for the book, but as her fingers brushed the cover, she recoiled as if burned. This is cursed. The language wasn't meant for mortals. It wasn't meant for anyone. Then why does it exist?" Arlen asked, his voice trembling. Maelys shook her head. "That's the question no one has been able to answer. But I'll tell you this, every time the language resurfaces, death follows. Kingdoms fall. Entire civilizations are wiped out. If you value your life, you'll destroy that book and forget you ever saw it." Arlen stared at her, his heart pounding. Could he really destroy it? Something inside him screamed no. The language, the shard, the symbols, they felt like a key to something greater, something the world wasn't meant to lose. "I can't do that," he said quietly. "I need to understand it." Maelys sighed, her expression a mix of frustration and pity. "Then you'd better prepare yourself, boy. Because once you start down this path, there's no turning back." The unseen toll. Arlen stayed in Durwin longer than he'd planned. Maelys, despite her warnings, couldn't resist the allure of the golden language. Like Arlen, she was drawn to it, a moth to a flame. She tried to keep her distance at first, but every night, she found herself pacing her workshop, staring at the book as if it held some unspeakable secret just out of reach. "I shouldn't help you," she muttered one night as the two of them hovered over the book. The golden shard lay on the table between them, glinting faintly in the candlelight. "But damn it, boy, I need to know. The scholar in me won't let this go." Together, they began their research. Maelys had a collection of ancient texts and scrolls, many of which contained fragments of languages that hadn't been spoken in centuries. She cross-referenced them against the symbols in the book, searching for patterns, similarities, anything that might shed light on the golden language. Days turned into weeks. Arlen rarely left her workshop. He spent his days poring over texts and his nights dreaming of shimmering symbols and whispered voices. The pull of the language was growing stronger, and the shard seemed to hum faintly whenever he held it, as if it were alive. One evening, Maelys finally made a breakthrough. "These symbols," she said, pointing to a line of text in the book, "they're not random, they're phonetic. Look here, this one matches a symbol in an ancient dialect from the Southern Isles. And this one, it's nearly identical to a rune used by the sun priests of Corvea." Arlen leaned over her shoulder, his heart racing. "So you can translate it?" "Not yet," she said, "but I think I can decipher the sound of the words. If we figure out how to pronounce them." Her voice trailed off. The unspoken danger hung heavy in the air. "If we speak them," Arlen said, finishing her thought. Maelys nodded grimly. "I won't lie to you, boy. This is reckless. Foolish, even. But if we can just understand a single word, it might give us the key to unlocking the rest of the language." Arlen hesitated. He knew the risk. The stories had made that clear enough. But he couldn't walk away now. Something deep in his gut told him the language was more than just words on a page. It was a key to something ancient and powerful, something the world had forgotten. "I'll do it," he said finally. "I'll speak it." Melis stared at him, her expression unreadable. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "If this language is as dangerous as you say, then someone has to take the risk. If we understand it, maybe we can learn how to control it. Maybe we can stop it from hurting anyone else." Reluctantly, Melis agreed. She spent the next few days preparing, crafting wards and protections she hoped would shield Arlen from the worst of the language's effects. She didn't know if they would work, no one did, but it was better than nothing. On the night of the experiment, the two of them sat in the center of the workshop. Candles flickered around them, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. The book lay open between them, the golden letters shimmering faintly in the dim light. Melis handed Arlen a scrap of parchment on which she had written a single word in the golden language. "This is the simplest word I could find," she said. "I think it means light, or something close to it." Arlen's mouth was dry. He stared at the word, his pulse thundering in his ears. The letters seemed to glow brighter as he focused on them, their golden sheen almost hypnotic. "Whenever you're ready," Melis said quietly. Arlen took a deep breath and opened his mouth. "Laterial." The word hung in the air, resonating like the chime of a distant bell. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the room seemed to shift. The shadows on the walls twisted and writhed, and the air grew thick and heavy, as if the world itself were holding its breath. A searing pain shot through Arlen's chest. He gasped, clutching at his heart as a wave of heat spread through his body. He felt as though he were burning from the inside out, the golden word carving itself into his very soul. "Arlen!" Melis shouted, but her voice sounded distant, muffled. The pain reached its peak, and for a brief, blinding moment, Arlen saw something, images flashing through his mind faster than he could comprehend. A vast, golden city rising from the sands, a towering obelisk etched with shimmering symbols, and a voice, deep and resonant, speaking in the golden language. Then it was gone. Arlen collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. The pain had vanished as suddenly as it had come, leaving him trembling and drenched in sweat. "Arlen!" Melis knelt beside him, her hands shaking. "Are you all right? What happened?" He struggled to catch his breath. "I saw something. A city, golden, and a voice. It was speaking, but I couldn't understand it." Melis's brow furrowed. "A city? That doesn't make any sense. The language is older than any city we know of. What else did you see?" Arlen shook his head. "It was too fast. I couldn't make sense of it." Melis helped him to his feet, her expression a mix of concern and fascination. "This is unprecedented. You shouldn't have survived that. No one who speaks the golden language survives." "I don't think I did," Arlen said, his voice hollow. "What do you mean?" He held out his hand. It was trembling, and his skin had taken on a faint golden sheen. The shard, which had been lying on the table, now pulsed with a warm golden light. "I think," his voice faltered, "I think it's inside me now. The language, the shard, all of it." Melis stared at him, her face pale. "Arlen, if that's true, then you're not just a speaker of the language. You're a conduit." "A conduit for what?" "I don't know," she said. "But whatever it is, it's ancient, and it's powerful, and it's not going to let you go." The price of knowledge. Arlen's life changed irrevocably after speaking the word. The faint golden sheen on his skin refused to fade, no matter how much he scrubbed. At first, it was barely noticeable, a subtle shimmer under the light. But as the days passed, it grew more pronounced. His veins glowed faintly at night, and his reflection in the mirror carried an otherworldly hue. Even more unsettling was the sensation that the shard and the language were alive within him. He heard whispers in his mind, not voices exactly, but impressions, feelings, and fragments of meaning that seemed to bubble up unbidden. When he touched the book, the symbols shimmered brighter, as if responding to him. Melis, ever the scholar, was both terrified and fascinated. "This is unlike anything I've ever seen," she said one evening as she examined the shard. It pulsed faintly in her hand, as if it had a heartbeat of its own. "It's as if the language has bonded with you. I don't think you can separate yourself from it anymore." Arlen's stomach churned. "What does that mean for me?" Melis hesitated. "I don't know. The golden language has always brought death to those who speak it, but you've survived. Somehow you've become a part of it. Or maybe it's become a part of you." "That doesn't make me feel better," Arlen muttered. "It wasn't meant to," Melis said grimly. "This is dangerous, Arlen. Not just for you, but for anyone around you. The language has a history of destroying everything it touches. You've seen the stories, entire cities wiped out, kingdoms reduced to rubble. If you lose control of it—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. That night, Arlen dreamed of the Golden City again. It rose from the sands, its towers gleaming in the sun. He walked through its streets, the air humming with energy. The people in the city spoke the golden language, their voices melodic and strange. But something was wrong. The golden light that suffused the city began to darken, turning a sickly green. The people's faces twisted in agony, their voices turning to screams. The city crumbled around him, the towers collapsing into the sand. And then, in the distance, he saw it. A massive obelisk etched with the same shimmering symbols as the book. As he approached it, the symbols began to glow, and a voice boomed in his mind. "You cannot wield what you do not understand." Arlen woke with a start, his heart pounding. The words echoed in his mind, clear and unshakable. The next day, Melis announced her decision. "I can't help you anymore," she said, pacing her workshop. "This is bigger than me, bigger than anything I've ever studied. If the language is bonded to you, then you're the only one who can find the answers. But I can't be a part of it." Arlen stared at her, stunned. "You're leaving." "No," she said. "You are." "What?" Melis took a deep breath. "There's a place, an ancient ruin in the eastern deserts. It's said to be the last known remnant of the civilization that first discovered the golden language. If there are answers to be found, they'll be there." "How do you know about this?" Arlen asked. "I've spent my life chasing fragments of this language," she said. "I've read scrolls, listened to legends, studied every artifact I could find. All of it points to the same place, the obelisk of Solarnes. It's the source of the language, or at least the closest thing we'll ever find to it." Arlen's mind raced. The obelisk in her description matched the one he'd seen in his dreams. "You're sure it's real?" he asked. "As sure as I can be," she said. "But it's a dangerous journey, Arlen. The desert is unforgiving, and the ruins are said to be cursed. If you go, you'll be risking your life." Arlen looked down at his hands, the faint golden glow emanating from his veins. "I don't think I have a choice. This thing inside me, it's growing stronger. If I don't figure out how to control it, I'll end up like those cities in the stories." Melis nodded, her expression somber. "Then you'd better prepare yourself. You'll need supplies, protection, and allies. The desert isn't a place you can survive alone." Arlen set out a week later. Melis provided him with maps, a sturdy horse, and enough provisions to last several weeks. He was grateful for her help, though he could tell she was relieved to see him go. The golden language was a weight neither of them could carry for long. The journey to the eastern deserts was long and arduous. Arlen traveled through dense forests, across windswept plains, and over rocky mountain passes. Along the way, he began to notice changes in himself. The whispers in his mind grew louder, more coherent. At times, they seemed to guide him, steering him away from danger or leading him toward hidden paths. Once, when a band of thieves tried to ambush him on a lonely road, the golden shard in his satchel flared with light, blinding his attackers long enough for him to escape. But the changes weren't all benign. Arlen's dreams grew darker, filled with images of destruction and chaos. He often woke in the middle of the night, gasping for air, his body drenched in sweat, and the golden glow on his skin continued to spread, creeping up his arms and legs like a living thing. By the time he reached the desert, he felt like a stranger in his own body. The sand stretched as far as the eye could see, a vast ocean of gold and red. The heat was oppressive, the air shimmering with mirages. Arlen followed the map Melis had given him, though he couldn't be sure it was accurate. The ruins of Solarnes were said to be buried deep within the desert, hidden from the world by time and sand. Days turned into weeks. Arlen's supplies dwindled, and his strength began to waver. The whispers in his mind urged him onward, though he didn't know if he could trust them. He began to see strange shapes in the distance, towers and spires that disappeared when he approached. Finally, on the 23rd day of his journey, he found it. The obelisk of Solarnes rose from the sand like a jagged tooth, its surface etched with the shimmering symbols of the golden language. It was massive, towering above the dunes, its golden surface glinting in the sunlight. As Arlen approached, the whispers in his mind grew deafening, merging into a single voice. "Speak, and be judged." Arlen hesitated, his heart pounding. The obelisk radiated an almost palpable energy, and the air around it seemed to vibrate with power. He didn't know what would happen if he spoke, but he knew he had no choice. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward and spoke a single word in the golden language. "Solarnes." The ground trembled, the air filled with a blinding golden light, and the voice in his mind roared. "You have awakened the source." The awakening of the source. The light pouring from the obelisk of Solarnes was so intense that Arlen had to shield his eyes, but even through closed lids, the glow burned. The ground beneath him shook violently, and the once silent desert was now alive with sound. A low, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the obelisk itself. The voice in his mind, deep and ancient, echoed again. "You have a..." Arlen's heart raced. His instincts screamed at him to flee, to leave the obelisk buried and forgotten, but he couldn't turn back now. The golden language was alive inside him, demanding answers. He had come too far, risked too much, to walk away without knowing what he had awakened. "What is the source?" he asked aloud, though he didn't know if the voice could hear him. For a moment there was silence. Then, the golden symbols on the obelisk began to shift, rearranging themselves into new patterns. It was as if the obelisk was alive, its surface pulsing with the rhythm of an unseen heart. And then it spoke. "The source is all." The words reverberated through Arlen's body, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The golden language is the foundation of existence, the language of creation itself. Every word spoken in it alters the fabric of reality, bending the laws of time, space, and life. Arlen's breath caught in his throat. Then why does it kill those who speak it? The obelisk's glow intensified, casting the desert in an otherworldly light. Mortal beings are not meant to wield such power. The golden language is infinite, but your forms are finite. To speak it is to touch the essence of creation, and to burn away under its weight. "But I spoke it, and I survived," Arlen said, his voice trembling. The symbols on the obelisk shifted again, forming a pattern that seemed almost like a face, though it was constantly moving, as if refusing to settle into a fixed shape. "You are not the first to survive. Others have touched the source, and like you, they became conduits. But survival is not without cost. The language will consume you, piece by piece, until there is nothing left." Arlen took a step back, the golden shard in his satchel growing warmer, almost as if it were responding to the obelisk's words. "There has to be a way to stop it," he said. "A way to control it." The obelisk was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke again. "There is no control. There is only choice. You may continue to wield the language, shaping reality with your words, but each word will bring you closer to death. Or you may silence it, bury the language once more, and ensure it does not consume another soul." Arlen's mind raced. Bury the language? Silence it? How could he possibly turn away from something so powerful, something that could reshape the world? And yet, the cost was undeniable. "I can't bury it," he said finally. "Not yet. There's too much I don't understand. Too much I need to know." The obelisk flared brighter, as if angered by his response. "Your ignorance will be your undoing." The golden light began to recede, and the desert grew still once more. The obelisk symbols dimmed, their glow fading to a faint shimmer. Arlen stood in silence, his body trembling from the encounter. For a long time, he didn't move. He simply stared at the obelisk, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of questions and fears. The voice had answered some of his questions, but it had also left him with more uncertainties. The language was the foundation of existence, the essence of creation itself. But how could something so powerful and infinite be so destructive? Finally, he turned away. The answers he sought weren't here, not fully. The obelisk had told him enough to understand the stakes. But if he was going to master the golden language, he would need more than cryptic warnings and half-truths. As he mounted his horse and began the journey back through the desert, he felt a strange sense of purpose. The language had chosen him, and whether it would save him or destroy him, he was determined to uncover its secrets. The shadowed pursuers. By the time Arlen returned to the edge of the desert, his strength was waning. The golden glow on his skin had spread further, covering his arms, legs, and even his face. People in the villages he passed stared at him in fear and awe, whispering about the golden man as he rode through. It wasn't long before the stories of his transformation reached dangerous ears. In the distant city of Arcaline, a council of scholars and priests convened in secret. They had long studied the golden language, seeking to harness its power for their own ends. When they heard of the young man who had spoken the language and lived, they knew they couldn't let him slip through their fingers. "Send the Seekers," the high priest commanded. The Seekers were a group of elite warriors and sorcerers, trained to track and capture anyone who tampered with forbidden knowledge. They were relentless, merciless, and feared across the land. By the time Arlen reached the outskirts of Durwin, the Seekers were already on his trail. The language speaks. Arlen sensed them before he saw them. The whispers in his mind grew louder, warning him of danger. He couldn't explain how he knew, but he felt their presence. A cold, menacing force that seemed to press against his mind. The first attack came just after dusk. Arlen was camping in the forest outside Durwin when he heard the faint rustle of leaves. He reached for his knife, but before he could react, a shadowy figure emerged from the trees, moving with inhuman speed. The Seeker lunged, its blade aimed at Arlen's throat. Instinctively, Arlen shouted a word in the golden language. "Varatheon." The word echoed through the air, and the world seemed to freeze. The Seeker halted mid-strike, its body trembling as golden light erupted from its chest. The glow spread rapidly, consuming the figure in an instant. When the light faded, the Seeker was gone, leaving nothing but a faint scorch mark on the ground. Arlen staggered back, his heart racing. The word had come to him without thought, as if the language itself had guided him. But the toll was immediate. Pain shot through his body, and he collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. The whispers in his mind were louder now, more insistent. They weren't just warning him anymore. They were guiding him, pushing him towards something he didn't fully understand. More shadows moved in the trees, and Arlen knew the Seekers wouldn't stop until they had him. As he fled through the forest, the golden language whispered in his mind, offering him power, protection, and destruction. But with each word he spoke, he felt the cost, the slow unraveling of his own existence. He didn't know how long he could hold on. But one thing was certain, the language wasn't finished with him yet.